waited a little longer than we would have liked to come out with his proposal. So there were three pieces of legislation on the table. And the Senate Republicans, and they're so good at this, and I know, and have known for many, many years, the head of the...
Good morning, everybody. My name is Arthur Schiff, and I'm the co-chair of the City League of Women Voters Campaign Finance Reform Committee, which is a very active committee and focused. As you all know, the city and state leagues' legislative priorities have long included campaign finance reform, but also the women's equality agenda, election reform, and ethics reform. Our speaker today, Barbara Bartoletti, the legislative director of the State League of Women Voters, has been at the center of the Albany action on all of those issues. Barbara is here today to talk to us about campaign finance reform. But before she does, a little campaign finance reform history is in order. The city and state leagues have been in the forefront of the efforts to reform campaign finance reform, and especially New York State's extremely loose and largely unenforced campaign laws. As a discouraging example, of all the states that set maximum limits on campaign contributions, New York State has the highest limits. Last year, hopes were high that reforms could be enacted. A series of high-visibility indictments of state legislators, some involving the acceptance of campaign contributions to affect legislation, got the public's attention. Governor Cuomo endorsed campaign finance reform, and the Assembly passed its version. At the last minute, however, the Senate adjourned for 2013 without considering the Assembly-passed bill. In frustration, Governor Cuomo appointed a Moreland Act commission to investigate corruption in state government, especially in connection with campaign contributions. The Moreland Commission began its work in June and in December issued its preliminary report. The commission identified many instances of deplorable conduct centered on utilizing campaign contributions to influence legislative and executive actions, and called for a comprehensive campaign finance change and also ethics reform, including lowering the state's high contribution limits, closing contribution loopholes, including the LLC loophole, establishing a small donor matching system of public financing based on the New York City model, limiting the personal use of campaign funds, enhanced enforcement of the new rules, and the creation of tough new disclosure rules for the shadowy, independent expenditure spending groups. Governor Cuomo accepted the commission's recommendation, and 2 weeks ago, in his budget address to the legislature, he urged enactment of comprehensive ethics and campaign finance reform along the lines of what the Moreland Commission had recommended. And he included funds for additional enforcement staff at the State Board of Election in the budget. That brings us to today. Now let's hear what the chances are for enactment of campaign finance reform legislation in 2014, and particularly what we here in New York City at the City League can do to push the process along. Barbara Bartoletti has been the legislative director of the State League of Women Voters since 1988. She oversees all legislation of interest to the League in the state legislature. She lectures around the state on advocacy, issues, and citizen participation in government. She does political commentary for Channel 9 News in Albany and is a spokesperson for good government groups all over New York State. And since last year, she has been a special advisor to the Moreland Commission investigating New York State government. It is my great pleasure and my sincere honor to introduce and welcome Barbara Bartoletti.
Arthur, for that. That was a lovely introduction, both to the issue and to me. Thank you so much. It was I come and go on the train fairly regularly, usually to New York City, but this morning, it was a very bumpy trip to the point where those of us sitting in the back in the cafe car were kind of going out of our seats, and I thought, this is really strange. Well, come to find out, there is ice on the tracks, and so there's no flexibility. So the conductor had to call and say, you have to slow this train down because we can't sit in the train without provoking injuries. So it took a little bit longer to get here than it usually does. But I'm so pleased actually to be here. It's always a highlight for my activities in Albany to come, whether it's when I go to Ithaca or I go to Binghamton, Rochester, or come down here to actually talk to the people who matter the most, and that's our local league members. Because without you to back us up in Albany, we would be really more than a cry in the wilderness, which sometimes we feel we already are. But it is just fascinating to watch legislators when they realize that we have 50 local leagues around the state with many members who are, and this is the most important thing, who are extraordinarily active in their local areas. So I happened to be, Monday, we had a league training day, a lobby day, where you could go and talk to your legislators after you'd been briefed. We had a whole about 4 hours, I guess, of briefing on all the different issues. And I took some people around on a tour of the Capitol, which maybe some of you have been on, which I usually do. And there were about 8 people from the Utica, Rome area. And we went up into the gallery. They wanted to see the legislature. And after about 15 minutes, one of them leaned over to me and said, "This is really boring." I said, probably one of the reasons why I don't spend an awful lot of time up here. So I said, how would you like to call, because I could see that their representatives were on the floor. I said, how would you like to call someone off the floor? They went, oh, we can do that. I said, yes, we can do that. So I took them down and around to the back of the assembly, and I took out one of my cards, wrote their names, gave it to the sergeant at arms, and these 3 legislators, there were actually 3 assembly members that lapped over into the members that we had, their districts. These people were falling over one another to actually get out of the chamber so they could talk to their constituents. That's how important constituents are, because they understand that my members vote. My members are active, my members have opinions, the league has issues. So when they see me or hear the word League of Women Voters, politicians are very quick to realize, oh, well, they probably voted for me, or I wish they would vote for me, and so I'd better be nice. And that's not just the being nice, but the trying to influence is what we really want league members to do in their local areas. And people think you have to go to Albany to lobby. That's really the worst place to lobby, except for those of us who are there every day. The best place to lobby your local legislators is right in their office down here in the district, or in their district up somewhere in upstate New York, because you don't have to worry about the hordes of other people who are lobbying on the same day you are, and therefore they're going to give you lip service and get out to the next group in the next 10 minutes. And you are much more likely to actually have face time with your legislator. So we encourage our members to see their members on a Thursday or a Friday in their local districts so that you can actually have a good, maybe half an hour face-to-face conversation with your legislators. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what is going on and what you can do to actually put pressure, and I want to tell you it's going to be needed. Yesterday, we had about 14 inches of snow yesterday in Albany. They canceled session, so everybody kind of got out of town. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is the budget hearing where the State Board of Election is in the budget. It's in the public protection part of the budget. So I'm thinking, well, a lot of people will cancel. The people here in Albany will show up for it. So I got up early and I snowblowed my driveway out. And I made sure so I could get out before the snow fell even heavier. So I got down there at 11 o'clock. The hearing started at 10 with the Office of the Court Administration. And this was actually a criminal justice. That's the public protection. Well, I got there at about 11 o'clock, 11:15, and I testified at 7:35 last night. And I've been doing this for a very long time. And I finally said to someone, an inside counsel in the Senate, tell me exactly why the State Board of Elections is positioned in the public protection part of the budget, which is all about criminal justice. Everybody testified, all the unions, the correctional unions, all of the state troopers, the head of the prisons, and of course the big issue in Albany this year, as it may be some down here a little bit, are the prison closures. So the hearing started at 10, and at 1:45 they finally finished with the first two speakers. So we knew it was going to be a very, very, very long day. But the league is nothing if not persistent. So at 7:30, I get up there to testify on the State Board of Elections aspect of the budget. Amy Allo, who was our election specialist, could not get out of her driveway. So she had called me and said, you're going to have to do both parts of it. Well, so I sit down, and it's Senator DeFrancisco, who's head of the Senate Finance Committee. He's from Syracuse area. And Denny Farrell, who is head of Ways and Means, is down here. And the very first question they asked me, Barbara, we heard rumors you were going to retire. Is that true? I said, I don't really know where you heard that rumor, but no, the league hasn't really come to that conclusion yet. And I said, but we do have a new young person who came to us from the Center for Women in Government, and we kind of got that out of the way, introduced Sarah, although she was probably at her computer at home listening to this, but now they at least know her name and I said she drafted most of this testimony. And then I went into my explanation of why it was important that the governor put this in the, and by the way, by the time 7:30 comes, the one thing you don't do is read your testimony. You don't read your testimony beyond 3 o'clock because Senator DeFrancisco made it very clear, and he was very testy about the fact, don't read your testimony, just tell us. So that's what I did. Well, it became very clear as we got further and further into the question and answer period, because I went through very quickly what it was we were asking, our ask in the budget, and that we were grateful for the executive's commitment to this issue, but now we needed the legislature to be committed to it, and we needed the budget not to be, and I said in very, very sharp tones, what we don't want you to do is slash it out of the budget, which is, of course, what we think they will do. So it became very clear after that exchange that went on for several minutes that there was nobody on that podium, Democrat or Republican, Senate or Assembly, and there were about 12 people because they couldn't go anywhere. It was snowing, so they all stayed around. But it was very clear that there wasn't a commitment on anybody's part in the legislature to actually do this campaign finance reform. And that makes it very important for me to be here today to actually talk to you, because every once in a while we kind of see that window of opportunity, we think, and this year, I mean, several things have happened, and I will go through this, but it isn't ever over until it's really over. It's kind of until the fat lady sings, well, this fat lady hasn't gotten quite fat enough yet, and we really, really are going to need your help. So let me just back up a little bit and talk about our favorite topic, scandals. I mean, doesn't everybody love a scandal? We certainly have enough of them in Albany. I mean, it's, kind of fun to review every once in a while. And I have in front of me, if anybody indeed doesn't get the idea that the culture of corruption in Albany exists, I'm going to delete the names. You could fill in the names because I think many of you down here probably know many of them. But I'm just going to tell you what the issue is they've been indicted or accused of. Pay to play for legislative efforts and personal use of official funds. That's something called personal use of campaign funds, something we'd like to see and it is in the budget proposal, and I will go through that. The next person who was sitting up on the podium until about an hour before I testified, and I thought, it's going to be very strange to talk about public corruption when an indicted legislator is sitting right up there in front of me. He had the good taste to leave before they knew that NYPIRG and the League were going to testify. That issue involved member items for ballot access and pay to play for ballot access. The next one includes pay to play for legislative efforts, not-for-profit electioneering scam, and false travel reimbursements. You may be getting the hint here. Member item, personal use of official funds, not-for-profit scam, member items, and personal use of official funds. Pay to play for legislative efforts. Pay to play for legislative efforts. It goes on for about 2 more pages. These are all of the people who have been indicted. Most of them are in jail now, in prison now. Some of them are on trial. I think you have a legislator down here who is currently on trial. William Boyland is, I think his trial started Monday. And you have a couple who, there's Mr. Smith, who was actually up on the podium yesterday, has asked for a motion to wait until, not to be tried until after the election, until after, quote unquote, he gets reelected. So the scandals have certainly played a major factor in bringing to the public's eye the need to change the corruption in Albany. And so when the legislation was introduced that Arthur talked about, both in the Assembly with Mr. Silver's name on it, and then it was passed. Now, let me just caution you. It always looks wonderful when you have the Speaker of the Assembly's name on a piece of legislation. Legislative commitment. This is the leader of the Assembly. Oh, this bill is sure to pass. Well, yes, indeed, the bill does pass. And then, of course, everybody stands up at a press conference and says, look at us, how wonderful we are, what great reformers. But I know a little secret. And I'll go to my death believing in this, that somewhere in the dark recesses of the Capitol or some restaurant in Albany, the leaders of the Senate and the Assembly have gotten together and they've said, okay, I'm going to be the good guy on this. So I'm going to pass this one House bill, but don't you dare pass it. So, of course, if the Senate doesn't pass it, it never does become law and doesn't get signed by the governor. I am totally convinced that that's really the dirty secret of how Albany functions. So in this regard, Mr. Silver said, okay, he's always been the good guy on campaign finance reform, except it has never become law. So again, the Silver bill, and we had some problems with the Silver bill, but we said, first good step, you make these, you always make the caveat because you have to play the game that's played in Albany. So there were some things we really didn't like about the Silver bill, and when Jeff Klein, who is the leader of the IDC, and all of you know the independent conference, and he and 3 other people are in that independent conference. It was 4 other people, but they kind of threw Mr. Smith out when he got indicted. So now it's Mr. Klein, Ms. Savino, and David Carlucci, who is in the Hudson Valley, and David Valesky, who is upstate, up Syracuse area, above Syracuse. That bill we actually did like. We liked that the most. It included the strict enforcement that we wanted at the State Board of Election. It did all the other things, lowered limits, did a lot of the things. We banned housekeeping accounts, which we think is a necessity, although I can tell you, you never let the good be the enemy, or the perfect be the enemy of the good. So you kind of, and Sally taught me that. Sally has taught me that. We say that a lot about a lot of pieces of legislation. We go, okay, is this good enough? Well, no. Is it, not perfect, but we should probably look to support this? Yes, and that is how the game is played. So, and the governor, of course, waited a little longer than we would have liked to come out with his proposal. So there were 3 pieces of legislation on the table. and the Senate Republicans, and they're so good at this. And I know, and have known for many, many years, the head of the Senate, the council at the Republican Senate. Happens to be a defense attorney, does capital defense work, but he's an extraordinarily good attorney. And he just has this way about him, and I go and I talk to him about comprehensive campaign finance reform, and he stands there, he listens, and he says, "No, Barbara, we're not going to do that." And that's the answer I get. So indeed, good to their word, the Senate Republicans did not ever address it. And they have a little mantra, particularly on public financing. They have a couple key points that they go over and over and over and over again. But their mantra is public financing of campaigns, welfare for politicians. You want the taxpayer who really wants their property taxes to come down, who wants better education for their children, who want, you can go through 10 different things, and you want them to put public financing of candidates, even someone they might not agree with, you want them to pay for that. That is the Republican mantra. And then, of course, they do have their many, many problems with the system here in New York City that indeed public financing has been modeled after at the state level. We have modeled it after the New York City model. So that's kind of the answer we got last June as the session was winding down. And do I know what goes on in those backdoor negotiations between the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor? No, we aren't allowed into those backdoor negotiations. But if you listen to the governor's office, they say, we tried everything, we pushed, we screamed, we tried everything, and the Assembly comes along, but they don't like it, but the Senate just says no. Well, the Senate says no to me too. So the governor got exasperated, much as his father did. People here probably remember Mario Cuomo. I remember Mario Cuomo. And do you remember that he got exasperated? And so he went, not exactly the Moreland path, but he went to the Farrick Commission, which came about in 1988 and gave many of its reports between 1988 and 1990. Dean Farrick, most of you are familiar with Dean Farrick, wonderful man, and gave out all of these recommendations. And yesterday at the hearing, I literally picked up the Farrick Commission and said, this commission commenced in 1988 with its preliminary report, says the same thing in 2014. Nothing has changed. And so this governor, Cuomo, said, okay, I'm going to go a little bit different path. I'm going to begin a Moreland Commission. And the underlying thread, of course, when you decide to do an investigatory commission is all these scandals are out there. Let's see what else is out there, legislature. You don't want to clean up your own mess, then we'll force you to clean up your mess. So he convened the Moreland Commission. There were 25 DAs on this commission, equally dispersed between Republicans and Democrats, upstate and downstate. In fact, there were several upstate DAs from Franklin County, from Warren County, from the county executive from Onondaga, which is Syracuse, a DA from Erie, from Buffalo, and then, of course, some of them down here in the city. There were also law professors, probably some of the names would be familiar to you down here in the city. And we worked and I was along, there were three of us who were special advisors. One is the head of the state police. One was Robert Morgenthau, who would sound familiar to all of you, and myself. We had meetings all fall long, sometimes twice a week, one by conference call and one in person, and then it was suddenly decided, because the Daily News seemed to be knowing exactly what was going on at this Moreland Commission, so then they decided we wouldn't do phone calls, conference calls anymore. It would have to be in person. So then I ran back and forth here to New York City many times. Then they got really smart and they said, oh, this is costing us a lot of money for all these train and flights. So then they decided it would be better if they had video conferencing, which actually was so much more convenient for all of us. So many of us met here. A lot of the upstate DAs came to Albany, including the Albany DA, David Soares, because, of course, if they're going to bring any criminal, most of it will be brought through the Albany County DA because that's where the legislature is. So we met by video conference, and we worked very, very hard. They issued many subpoenas, many of which will come due March 1st. Of the state Senate, which, of course, Amy Yellow and I talked last night, and, we thought, well, there's only one Republican senator that's actually agreed to give over the records, and that's the Mark Grisanti sitting out in Buffalo. Other than that, there isn't a Senate Republican who has agreed to the information the subpoena has asked for. So what will happen at March 1st, Sally would be much better able to tell you that. I don't know whether they'll be in contempt of court. Could they be considered in contempt of court, Sally, if they don't agree to if they don't fork over the information?
I think they're still contesting the validity of this.
For the power, they're asserting that there is separation of powers problem. So that will, Sally's right, that will be litigated.
I'm here as
first.
Barbara's legal advisor.
Yes, she's my legal advisor. I don't go anywhere without her. but she's got a lot more information than I do. So our task by the executive order, our creation was by executive order, was that by December 1st of 2013, we would have to give a preliminary report. I can tell you, my job as special advisor was literally my expertise and experience for being in Albany all those years. And when the governor called me and asked me if I would be a special advisor, I said, Governor, are you trying to be nice and just tell me I'm old? He said, no, but you've just got so much experience in this area. So my job was to actually make sure these DAs, who after all are DAs dealing in a specific area of their counties and the not just white collar but criminal activity going on, murder trials, etc. They probably don't pay as much attention about Albany culture as I certainly have. So my job was to point them in the right direction, was to look at with I must add, many of my good government. The first thing I did was I said to the Moreland Commission, we need to bring in Citizens Union, we need to bring in NYPIRG, we need to bring in the Brennan Center, and all of the good government groups came in and testified before the commission to actually fill them in on the information out there as I was pointing out where the problems were. Member items are a problem. Well, certainly we've seen that in the previous indictments. Double dipping of legislators who double dip with their reimbursement, their per diems. We know that goes on. It has for a very long time. We know pay to play is going on, so I pointed them where they needed to look for that. So my job was actually then to help them develop the policies, and it could have come right out, and much of it did come right out of previous League and NYPIRG and Common Cause and CU and Brennan Center, all of the reports that we've put out over the last 3 decades of why the comprehensive campaign finance needed to happen. So once that was done, then we did, and it was down here, and it was unfortunate that it was actually held. The hearing was held here, and Sally came to that hearing. It was on the State Board of Elections, and one of the co-chairs leaned over to me, and it was held at the Javits Center, big room. We wanted to make sure everybody could, it was an open hearing, everybody could get there. And Milt Williams, who is from down here, and he leaned over to me and he said, I thought there'd be more people. I said, Milt, if you had held this in Albany, it would have been standing room only. People down here are not familiar, the public is not familiar with the State Board of Elections. They're familiar with the New York City Board of Elections. Oh, he went, oh, okay. So, but we had them come down, and I had an opportunity to watch DAs. I don't get into a courtroom, thank goodness, not at least the criminal part of the courtroom, but I had an opportunity to watch 2 of these DAs go at the State Board of Elections, and it was really fascinating. They were there, they must have been up there 2 hours at least, and they just picked these people right apart with the ineptness of that agency. It's a bipartisan, gridlocked agency. literally controlled by the two parties. And so as far as campaign finance violations, nothing has happened in years. In fact, they were given money in 2007 budget by then Governor Spitzer. They never used it. They never filled those spots. They don't fill the investigatory or auditing areas of the State Board of Elections simply because they don't want to do anything about it. And they haven't done anything about it, and it became very clear in Moreland. And in fact, of the Moreland Commission that I have here, about 30-some pages of that report literally is given over to the State Board of Elections and how incompetent it is on campaign finance reform. So we've had the scandals, we have had the Moreland Commission, we've uncovered for public showcasing the ineptness of the State Board of Elections, and along with, and many of you, how many of you actually are able to kind of watch on a computer the state of the state? Yeah, you can get that, you can stream it, and the governor again put forward his commitment in the state of the state to campaign finance reform, as well as women's equality, as Arthur said. So then we come to the budget. So we knew that the good government groups had been asking for the governor to be a little bit more quick about getting it out there in the public this legislative session. So it gave those of us doing advocacy time to mobilize, and you're already mobilized because we've been doing this for so many decades, but to really get the opportunity to do our advocacy during the budget process. So we were very, very gratified when the budget came out 2 weeks after the State of the State, and lo and behold, the executive had shown his commitment by putting it in the budget. And there are two areas of the budget that campaign finance actually is in this year. It is in what we call Article 7 bills, which are the policy parts. It's what the governor says will be his proposals for policy. Particularly, and this, even though there isn't an amount for the public financing part in the appropriations bill, I would have wished that there had been an appropriation for the public financing. There was not. However, in the appropriations bill, which is the dollar amount that is supportive of the policy and how you implement that policy, for the State Board of Elections, for a renewed structure of the State Board of Elections called a separate entity called the, I have to get the exact name right, it's called the Board of Elections.
Campaign enforcement.
It's they keep giving an initial CF.
Enforcement Council in the Board of Elections.
Yes, and there was a name that I had to use yesterday that I don't even remember now.
Division of Election
Thank
Law
you.
Enforcement.
That's what it's called, Division of Election Law Enforcement. And that, DELI, if that's the acronym, DELI. But there is $5.3 million in that appropriation for 11 full-time employees to augment the 18 employees now, which I can tell you do not do any campaign finance enforcement. They do only education, which is necessary. You've got to educate the treasurers of these different committees, necessary. But all told, that will add up to 29 employees in this enforcement unit. And the most important part of it is literally that there would be one enforcement officer. Now, we can quibble, and the good government groups all have a little bit different slant on whether or not they like exactly how it is set up. But what the governor has proposed is an enforcement officer appointed by him and confirmed by the Senate. So that, in the governor's eyes, and I don't want to speak for the governor because I haven't talked to him about this recently, but it was in his proposal last year. So you can imagine that he had some deliberations to decide how they were going to do that. So this would be an appointment by him, confirmed by the Senate, check and balance, and then he or she could only be removed for good cause with a 4-year term, and only removed for good cause by the governor. Well, we can probably figure that the legislature isn't, especially the assembly, may not like that because it puts them right out of who might be picked for this. I can tell you the Moreland's recommendation was that whomever this person is at the top of the enforcement unit, that it would be someone with 5 years of prosecutorial experience. So they want a prosecutor with this experience, with the experience of knowing about investigations and knowing how to prosecute, to be the head of this enforcement unit. There would be about I'm told between 3 and 6 investigators, 6 investigators, 3 auditors, or 6 auditors and 3 investigators. That they weren't terribly clear, but one of the things we do in talking to our good government colleagues, $5.3 million probably isn't enough. So what we said in our budget testimony is adequate. What we do know is the legislature isn't going to add money for that. So we are going to, and what we have also said is you can't have just the 5.3 or 10.2 or whatever it is that might be allocated. You have to, in the succeeding years, you have to have a steady stream so that this agency then cannot be starved, because that's another little thing that the legislature is good at. If they don't like something, they starve it of money and hope it dies on the vine. So that's essentially where we are right now. NYPIRG testified last night also. They had a little bit different twist on this. They want an entirely separate entity outside of the Board of Elections. The governor's proposal is it is within the Board of Elections, and the league's thoughts there, because don't forget, we have an election specialist, and Amy has worked with the local boards of elections and the state board of election for over 3 decades. But what our thinking is you need an infrastructure, you need computers, you need housing. This unit has to be housed somewhere, and therefore the Board of Elections unit itself that already has an infrastructure might be the most appropriate place to do this, because with our longevity in the legislature, if you said a separate entity, then they would tell you, oh, well, we don't have any contracts out for any place to house these people, so it will be further down the road. So we felt the most logical place was within the board, but independent, robust, nonpartisan, and it must be carried out with the technicians, the technocrats that would come in should be irrespective of party. Right now, it was proven when the Moreland Commission did this with the Board of Elections that they are bipartisan. Now, they are bipartisan by Constitution here in New York as far as the administration of elections. You have to have Democrats and Republicans in the Constitution. The Constitution does not say, and I've had several attorneys that I think probably have a good sense of this that have told me that does not apply to campaign finance reform. It applies to election administration. But in this current Board of Elections, right down to the secretaries are Democrats or Republicans. It goes all the way down the structure. That truly makes, and they never talk to one another. And what came out in the Moreland Commission was the one investigator, we have none at the moment, but the one investigator they did have played solitaire on the computer for his daily work schedule. He played solitaire and read Bible verses because no one ever gave him anything to do. He finally left of his own accord. They had another person in the enforcement unit who got a little bit too good at her job. They fired her. The head of the Democrat, Big D, Enforcement Council retired rather than have to deal with the Moreland Commission and moved to Florida. We did subpoena her, and she refused to come back from Florida. So that gives you a little idea of where the State Board of Elections resides in regard, and I can't say that strongly enough, in regard to campaign finance reform. We have on the other side of the board tried to work very well with them as far as implementation of the MOVE Act and of HAVA and the other areas that we work with them on the administration of elections. So, and I think I'm probably getting late here, but you're not going anywhere? Well, as far as the other elements of campaign finance reform in the Article 7, the policy part of the state budget, is all the rest of the campaign finance issues that were in the governor's proposal from last year. So if you were to get a hold of, the budget is really boring reading unless you know exactly what you're looking for and can get it in a paragraph. But if you go back to the governor's proposal of last year, you pretty much know what he's put in the budget.
We're going to have a summary, Barbara. We're going to put Sarah's summary. Sarah did a summary of the campaign finance and reforms in the governor's Article 7 part of the budget, and that's going to be on our website. If it's not there already, it'll be on our website. The testimony from yesterday should be on the website.
Very good
today.
And Sarah did most of that writing also. We are extremely fortunate to have a very gifted writer in our program director now. She's quite an asset. I think both Sally and I would agree. She's a wonderful asset. And she's young and she's energetic. So now, when I sat there yesterday, the only questions other than are you going to retire, Barbara, or when are you going to retire, and apparently Amy thinks I must have been a thorn in Mr. DeFrancisco's side for some time. She said, Barbara, he was downright nasty. I've been doing this for so long, that must kind of roll right off my head, because I didn't think he was any nastier than he usually is. But at any rate, what came out was they think that this public financing unit here in New York City, including Denny Farrell, who is a Democrat, they don't think it's effective. Believe it or not, they don't think it's effective. They think the disclosure and the auditing is far too picayune, and Mr. DeFrancisco said, well, we had them come before us last year in a Senate hearing, and they're still doing audits 4 years after the election. And I said, Senator, if you believe strongly that there are some problems with the auditing system in the New York City model, and you would like to offer suggestions for the state level, I think we would be happy to sit down and go over those suggestions with you. The crux of this all is the Republicans, as I said, say no. They don't give you any suggestions. They just say no. So the other thing they talked about, Denny Farrell did ask my colleague Bill Mahoney when he testified, was about the too many people are able to run under this public financing system, which we kind of thought was a good thing. He said, well, if you can have 5 people run, you can have 10 people run. And you're just giving out all this money to all these people who want to run for office. And, I mean, we just kind of sat there and thought, isn't that what a representative democracy and competitive elections is all about? Exchange of ideas, let the best man or woman win. So it is just very clear to those of us who've walked the halls and talked to these people. And as I said, Shelley Silver's bill, the Democrats all voted for it. Well, they all voted for it because they knew darn well it was going to happen in the Senate. So they could all look like the reformers that they want you to believe they are. What I need from those of you sitting in this room and all of the people and all of your neighbors and your friends and your relatives and anybody you can talk to out there, what we need from you is we need to actually go, and most of your elected, anybody here have a Republican representative? No, I didn't think so. Okay. Denny Farrell. Well, Denny's a really good guy, and Denny's been around an extremely long time. Denny's not anybody's fool. He knows what he's doing. Oh, you do have one. Staten Island.
No, Denny Farrell is that.
Denny Farrell, he's a Democrat. Who in who do you have? Marty Golden?
Say it again?
Marty Golden? No.
I can't remember.
Oh, okay, but it's an assemblyman or a senator?
Both.
Okay. Oh, well, I'd have to go to my book and think for a minute. Staten Island. Lovely place. I've not been there, but lovely place. At any rate, we need you to continue to put whatever pressure you can put on them. They need to know they're going to hear about this every 2 minutes. Letters, and let me just stop there and tell you, They think the New York Times is just not read by an awful lot of their voters. They literally told me that yesterday. We don't care about the New York Times. We don't care about the editorial boards. None of our voters ever read it. So, that said, do most of you in this room have community papers that are read by the people in the communities? And I'm sure, because this has been my mantra for a long time, so I'm sure all of you know, it's the community papers where you constantly want to have a letter to the editor, get an appointment with, if they have editorial boards, just flood them. And then we really need, we will be doing this, I think I don't know whether it'll be in the form of an action alert or what, we're going to talk about what exactly we're going to do as far as. Great, there it is. Oh, shall we hand it out? Yeah, all right, good, thank you, Sally. Yeah, just the talking points. Go that way and this go this way.
Probably almost enough.
Yeah, the talking points for when you call your legislators. And I would encourage you to do it soon, to go out there while the budget doesn't get done until April 1st. The other benchmark that I want you to all look at is around the first week in March, that first several days when they're in session in March. Look for something called their one-house budget bill. The Assembly will come out with a one-house budget bill, and the Senate will come out with a one-house budget bill. Look for those budget bills to see if they've kept campaign finance reform in any of they can slash it out of the Article 7, they can slash it out of the appropriations bill. They can't slash the amount, but they can slash the language. That's typically what we're afraid they will do. But look at what we just passed out. Those are your marching orders for calling your legislators. And if they think we're such a thorn in their side, well, let's be that thorn in their side. Let's take pride in the fact that they should hear from us at least every week, if not twice a week, about what are you doing about the budget? What are you doing about campaign finance in the budget? I mean, that really is where they need to have so much pressure because they think, and then I'll give over the microphone, they think that there aren't enough people to really do them any harm at the ballot box. They think this is an issue that the voters don't care about. So they feel covered, and they don't feel as though it's going to jeopardize their elections in any way, and so they think they can just not do it. So let's not let them get away with that. It has been 3 decades, 2 commissions. Everybody knows what the problem is. Again, how many more people have to be taken out in handcuffs? Probably will be more this session, so stay tuned. But every time it happens, if it happens again between now and the budget, slam them. Just, I am nice to them, and I say, we know that this isn't all 213 of you. We know most of you come here to just serve your constituents. Well, then they're going to get tainted by that broad brush, and unless they change it, so they should.
Would you like to answer a few questions?
Oh, absolutely. Answer any questions you have. Absolutely. Let me just get some more water.
I think Adrian had her hand up first.
Oh, of course. Oh, I just assumed everybody knew. Sally Robinson is our state league president.
I'm
and
sorry,
also
Sally, I didn't introduce you. I just figured everybody knew you by now.
A sustaining member.
Yeah, I just, my question really is, we've campaigned on the comprehensive and we all believe in it. But the question is, can we get anything passed? And particularly the contribution limits and loopholes part. I mean, is there any way we can get any of it passed? The city councilman put in a bill the other day, which I think is a fascinating bill, and that one bill, and his bill says that you cannot use campaign funds to defend yourself in a criminal proceeding.
Yes.
And that seems so simple that, just getting loopholes like that, starting that way in the legislature, if we know we're not going to get comprehensive reform?
You can't get them to put in any piece of legislation that would be a standalone with just one or two items. That's just not the way, it's the way an individual legislator might approach it. But don't forget, whether you're an assemblyman or whether you're a senator, you have to go through your leadership. And Shelley Silver has covered himself by putting out the Silver Bill. And so they're not going to, he would not let it even into committee, let alone out of committee and onto the floor. For those of you who already don't know, and I think probably everybody does, that the New York State Legislature is a leadership-driven legislature. So unless you get the blessing of the leader to put a piece of legislation into the hopper, unless you're a minority member, the Republicans do it, but it never sees the light of day. It goes on what we call a kill agenda, and that happens sometime in early May, and they just go through and kill all the Republican bills, except for home rule bills. So chances are they're not going to just put one or two elements in. The biggest boon this year is that it is in the budget. They do have to pass a budget. And if the governor really, and I would not leave the governor out of your advocacy, by the way. Now, there is a different way of doing it with the governor's office because you can't call Albany, well, you can, but you probably wouldn't hear back right away. I'd like to have a meeting with the governor. Sally and I often get meetings with the governor. Sometimes it's mostly with our other good government colleagues, but I spent most of last session in the governor's office, either on this piece or on the women's equality. Saw the governor twice a week on the women's equality. I mean, the governor has a commitment. How strong is that commitment depends on what his other issues are in an election year. Don't forget, for all of them, including the governor this year, it is an election year. He has to do things like, can we all just, tax cuts. He's going to do tax cuts this year because it's an election year. He's going to do something about economic, giving, education and giving the freeze and giving everybody a $375 check 3 weeks before the election because of the tax freeze. I mean, these are the things politicians do, whether you're a governor or an assembly member from the minority party. They all are interested in what they can give you, the constituent, in an election year. So they're going to do other things. What we have to figure out is if in this election year, what is he willing to give to get campaign finance reform? And that's something that will be done by the leaders of the different good government groups and how we strategize, how we work with the governor's office. But certainly there's nothing wrong with sending emails to the governor's office. Now you have to be somewhat careful about how you phrase that. And you really, that takes leadership from the organizations because we all want to speak with one voice. We don't want, yesterday it was, Bill and I figured it out in the 8 hours we sat there together. We figured out how we could, between the two of us, because Nightberg doesn't want the entity inside the Board of Elections, and we have said we support it as long as it's independent, et cetera, robust, et cetera. So Bill and I had to figure out how we were not going to be up there talking to these people and let them say, well, the good government groups don't even agree. So what do we have to, if they can't agree, why should we do anything? So you have to be very, very careful that when you do, especially in the governor's office or in Speaker Silver's office, that you know from what the league puts out, because we've already strategized with our good government folks, we know we are speaking with one voice, so they can't divide and conquer. I mean, that's, as advocacy strategy goes, that's probably number one. Yes, we want to be visible. Yes, we want people to know. Yes, you should talk to your own elected officials, Senate and Assembly. But we need to talk always with one voice because they will capitalize on it if we don't.
Yes, you have.
Yes, I'm astounded at the several pages of indictments and so forth. I am astounded. I did not realize it was that bad. But I think it's the same, but it's something we can use, I think. If we're talking to our Republican colleagues in the Senate, or anybody in the Senate, we can say, listen, look at the 3 pages of indictments. Don't you think we should do something about that? And this is the way to do it. And it only costs, what was it, 80 cents per man, woman, and child?
I think it's $3 a year. I think it's, at least in New York State, I think they've calculated about $3 a year for the public financing.
Okay.
Per taxpayer. The problem with using the indictments is you really get yourself into trouble with the Republican Senate because they go, well, yeah, look who these people are. They're all Democrats from downstate. Well, no, actually,
To a large extent, they
to a very large extent, yes. Yes, Mr. Bruno, who was the majority leader, is about to go to trial in April for some of the pay-to-play, is what I would call it, problems. Whether he's 84, almost 85, whether he'll be actually, he's been indicted, whether he'll actually be convicted.
Yes, 16%.
Obviously, campaign finance reform in New York got us de Blasio, Letitia James, Melissa Mark Viverito. The Republicans are not going to vote for this. Honestly, I'm not sure I see the point of calling the Republicans. Seems to me we need to put pressure on Cuomo, tell him that we are paying attention and we want him to campaign against anyone who is not going to vote for it in the budget. Wouldn't that be the logical?
Might be logical unless you're actually an elected politician, and that's not a dirty word. But there's a whole different mindset when you become an elected official. This governor clearly needs the Republican Senate. They are, and the ruling coalition, which is also the IDC. I think it's hard for many people who don't function in the world of politics to understand how the dance is done and how it's played. The IDC needs the Republicans to stay in power so they can stay in power. And being in power is a whole heck of a lot better than not being in power. And so the IDC needs the Republicans. The Republicans literally want to stay in power because they know how bad it is not to be in power. And in the Assembly, they don't worry about that all too much. But the governor needs to have a whole bunch of people upstate who are primarily independents and Republicans to vote for him because, after all, he wants to be over 60% if he thought he could get it. I'm not sure he can get over 60% of the vote in a re-election. Depends on who runs against him. But so and he is at heart a fiscal conservative. So on economic matters, he tends to be center-right. On social issues, as we've seen, he tends to be center-left. So he thinks he's a real centrist. And therefore, he's going to play with the other side to the extent he needs. Now, all of a sudden, if the Democrats in the Senate all of a sudden became all powerful, I think Cuomo would be much, much less to your liking than he might be right now. So it depends on how you just play the game.
Also, Barbara, we have to point out, as a strictly nonpartisan organization, we would never call upon one elected official to campaign against one party.
That's right.
Not against one party, against people who don't support campaign finance.
Well,
there are lots of them.
Democrats who would
Yes, in fact, most of them. I would venture to tell you that there is probably a core group of about 20 legislators in the entire legislature who support campaign finance reform. The rest of them do not, and they do not because they are trying to hold on to their incumbency, and they know how they have gotten elected, and they're scared to death to do it any other way. They don't know what a public system would be like. Would they get enough small donors, enough people? So they like it just exactly the same way. They don't, as much as they might tell you they don't like having to go out and cold call for people they don't know to give them $100,000 to run, they've learned how to do it, or they've learned from their Democratic and Republican campaign committees how the game is played, the fundraisers, et cetera, et cetera. So nobody's willing to change that. I could tell you, I could count on two hands the number of people who I think are genuinely committed to this. So this isn't like reproductive choice or like mandate relief for some people, or like charter schools, or like some of the other more hot button issues. This is an issue that none of them like, except a few true believers like a Sandy Galiff, who happened to be a league president, a Amy Paulin, who happened to be a league president. I mean, these are the kind of true believers we get. Yes, Arthur.
So last year, the City League's committee had a series of meetings with some of our local representatives down here. We actually even met with Senator Klein's staff. We didn't meet with Senator Klein. And a group of us met with the Nassau County League of Women Voters, some constituents from the League, with Senator Skelos. I believe Senator Skelos himself was at that meeting. So we've had...
And how did that go?
Well, Rosemary, one of our members, was there, and he said no, basically. He just said no, just as you. But
But
we
he's heard
felt...
from his own constituents who support campaign finance.
Right. So he heard from, as Rosemary just said, he heard from his own constituents who supported campaign finance. And so he was at least put in a position where his own constituents were urging him. My question really is, although I know that we are a nonpartisan organization and we don't take political stands or partisan.
We don't get involved in political campaigns at all.
Nevertheless, we at least, and you, have identified that it's the Republicans in the Senate, although you also say it's the Democrats
Yes.
who really don't want it. I must say, I question you about that. I agree that there are certainly a number of Democrats who don't want it, but there are also some Democrats that do want it.
And I could name about 20 of them.
All right, okay. So without, we could...
Putting numbers on them, yes.
Yeah. It seems clear that if we're going to get this done at any point, whether it's this year or next year, it's going to have to be that the Republicans either give up their opposition to it or that the independent Democrats, Senator Klein's group, give up some of their opposition or agree.
Or the elections change things.
Or the election changes things. My question, though, really is, can you help us identify which Republicans in the downstate area would be useful for us to try to meet with?
Yes, indeed I can.
So that would be one question.
Okay.
Because I think that on the committee, there are people that would be willing to go to those meetings and also encourage other state leagues, that is local leagues in the metropolitan area to jointly meet with them, because we felt that that meeting with Senator Skelos was a good model. We used the Nassau County.
Yes, and we always encourage leagues who overlap in any degree
Right.
to go together.
So it would be useful to get some good advice as to which senators we should focus on, because we think meetings, rather than letters, although letters can be effective as well.
Meetings are fine.
Meetings seem like a good way of putting that pressure on, local pressure on the senators. So perhaps you could...
Absolutely, and to the extent you have Republicans down here, you have Marty Golden. Mr. Martens, how far out is he? Nassau, I mean, he's an overlap with Nassau County.
Right.
And, I'm sorry?
Staten Island, is there a senator in Staten Island?
Well, all I have to do is...
Savino is,
She's on the...
well, she's an IDC.
She's an IGC.
She's an IDC, so certainly you don't want to overlook her, because they are much more likely to try and go both ways on this issue, as well as like the women's equality. They did what they needed to do because they knew they didn't have the votes, particularly on the abortion plank. But on this issue, they will agree probably with public financing. They probably would agree with the Board of Elections enforcement unit. Then you get into the nitty-gritty. Do they really think lowering contribution limits? They might even agree closing the LLC loophole. But then you get into the real weeds that Denny Farrell got in. I will tell you, Denny's been around, as all of you know, a very, very long time, and he was the head of the state party as well as his own local party, Kings County, I believe. New York County, Manhattan, New York County. So this is a man who has been in the trenches for probably 50 years on the nitty-gritty of running a campaign that I will never know, that none of you in this office, unless you've been campaign managers for political candidates, will ever know. We don't do that. So it's hard to put yourself into the weeds with a Denny Farrell, because there isn't anything about running elections he doesn't know. And so when he comes up with these questions that he did with Bill yesterday, you get an immediate understanding that Denny isn't going to go for this. He will sit there and let the speaker come out with his bill. But Denny isn't going to, he's going to vote for it when he has to get the speaker's bill passed. But on a one-to-one basis, Denny could spend 4 hours with you and you wouldn't know what to say at the end of it. That's my problem.
Barbara, you also have to remember that Silver's bill did not touch contribution limits
That's
for
right.
people who were not participating in the public financing system. It left unlimited housekeeping money. It left very high limits for people that weren't in the public financing system. I know that some of our, some of the other groups we work with, and I've talked to some of you about this before, like Fair Elections, thought that the Silver bill would be all hunky-dory if we just passed the Silver bill, but there are major issues with the Silver bill.
Yes, and we did not give it our support. We supported the Klein bill because the Klein bill was we felt a much better bill. You might find that Jeff Klein is one of those genuine true believers. I would certainly not leave him out, or Diane Savino. Carlucci and Valesky are a little bit out of your realm. I'm kind of looking here through the book, and most of what you folks have down here are Democrats. But I would also tell you that someone like Ruben Diaz is going to be terrible on this. He's terrible on everything. So he's not going to be good on this, yes.
Thank you, Bartoletti, for educating us on this. I've learned a lot, and I'm Jeff Curzon. I'm a candidate in New York 7. There'll be a Democratic primary June 24th. And I'm the only candidate in the country not taking PAC or lobbyist money, and called myself a single-issue candidate for campaign finance reform.
Excuse me, are you running for Congress?
Yeah, I'm running
Yes.
for House of Representatives, Washington. New York 7, Lower Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. But since you were bringing up some of these scandals, I want to draw attention to another scandal that happened when I was living in Lower Manhattan, District 1 City Council. And the reason it'll become clear why I'm bringing this up, the incumbent got 8,000 votes and won re-election. There was a challenger who got 6,000 votes. And we have this great publicly financed system of elections in New York. So each campaign could do small house parties, get matching funds, and run a successful campaign to get their issues out. But there's this other organization called Jobs for New York. And Jobs for New York sounds really like a good organization, and maybe some people think they are, but it was financed by the real estate industry, and they had millions and millions of dollars. And so they spent $450,000 carpetbagging the district. I got like 8 mailers saying that the challenger was an empty suit, that she was a fraud, really almost like libelous mailings. And so even when we do eventually pass a publicly financed system at the state level, I'm just giving this story as of a warning what still might happen, because if each campaign has 150,000 and then this friendly sounding organization called Jobs for New York spends 3 times that on a candidate they don't like, then what does that do?
I'm going to have Sally come up and explain that, because it is a huge problem that we have certainly, we are certainly well aware of. And these independent expenditures and the disclosure of these independent expenditures is something Sally is very much better equipped to talk about than I am. But it is, we know the huge problem it is. And are you talking about, there's another one that was principles, common sense principles, which is has a Virginia address.
That was in some upstate.
Some mid-Hudson and upstate.
Some upstate state races, but I mean, what this stems from in part is Citizens United.
Can you all hear her?
We're talking about here are independent, what he's referencing are independent expenditures. And under Citizens United, corporate entities and unions were allowed to make unlimited independent expenditures within a certain time of an election. Even under federal law, they were always allowed to make independent expenditures as long as they were, not too close to the election. But what Citizens United specifically said is they could use their own funds to do this sort of thing that could be interpreted as voting for or against a candidate, interfering in the election campaigns. Under New York state law, unlike federal law, corporations and unions were always allowed to make unlimited independent expenditures. So Citizens United didn't change anything in New York state law. But what it has done is probably just raise the awareness of outside groups that they can intervene in these type of expenditures. And both at the federal, at the national level, and at the state level, the League is very much in support of full disclosure of both the expenditures, attribution on any ads, and also disclosure of the funders of the ads. So at the federal level, that's called the Disclose Act, and if you go on the LWV US website, you can find out about that. And in Barbara's testimony, it also, in some other things we have on our website, you can see that we're in favor of all bills. This is one thing that our state politicians are very concerned about. They're all pretty much in favor of this because they don't like it. This is something, they don't want it limited how much, they don't want realistic limits on how much they can raise through their campaigns, but they sure don't like these undisclosed donors funding these independent expenditures against them, which makes it a little surprising, because a lot of people thought if anything was going to get passed last year, it would have been some kind of disclosure. But at the last minute, I guess it was again the Republicans, even though they are also very upset about these expenditures, because some of them have come out against the Republicans. It's not all one way. So that's what, right now, there's no way that those expenditures can, under current federal constitutional law, the expenditures can't be limited, but they can be disclosed, and they should be disclosed, and that's a League position everywhere.
And I would encourage you, as political consumers, I don't know how many of you watch television, probably the news shows as much as I do. I'm a real news junkie. But if you watch, you will see political ads. There's one that just came out 2 days ago of a woman who has lupus, and she's talking about Obamacare and how bad it was. And don't pay too much attention to what she says. What you always, or what he or she or whatever the ads say, what you always want to go immediately to is who's running it. This one happens to be Americans for Prosperity. How many of you can tell me what Americans for Prosperity are? The Koch brothers, of course. So all of a sudden, you as a consumer, and you tell your friends and don't look who's down there. You can make an informed decision as a League member. Who is this? And what is it their agenda is? And because Sarah did this nice handout for me. In the budget Article 7 bills, the contributions over, it's the governor's proposal, I'm pretty sure, contributions over $1,000 must be reported within 48 hours, within 24 hours, if within 30 days of any election. That's meant to give you, the voter, the information you need to decide who it is that's for or against this candidate.
Who's actually funding
it? That's right. Who's actually funding it, not just supporting it.
That's right. The ad, but who is actually funding the ad?
That's right. Laura, I think you had your hand up a long time.
Well, not on this particular one, but one quick one, but don't answer it because I want to ask the bigger one.
Okay. I'll just stand here.
Why doesn't the Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, already get into some of these cases where the legislators are under indictment or in jail? That's the first question. Before until this whole new unit is set up, perhaps in my lifetime. And the second one is, I believe there are 11 vacancies at the moment because people, both Assembly and Senate, are either under indictment or they're already in jail.
Or they've actually, we must say, or they have been elected to a different office.
Right. So there was a story in the Times around 10 days ago, and saying that the governor refuses to hold any special elections. These seats will be filled in the November election, and that there are millions of constituents throughout the state.
1.8
Well, at the
million.
moment, they have no representation in Albany, which lets those people who are not league members, because I was discussing this article with a couple of friends, and they say, Laura, why are you so hot to get people to vote? These people are perfectly content having nobody represent them in Albany, and we're saving the salary. And I mean, I gave my typical comments in response, but I think this is I'm not in favor of special elections. I'm not in favor of elections where very few people attend.
Or
and
that
they
the
cost a
party,
lot of
or that the
money.
party chairs get to select.
That's the bigger issue.
Right.
Yes.
So
Unfortunately, we don't have a position on it.
can the league at all speak out on this issue? Here are these, we believe in representative government, and here are all these people who are not being represented in a rather critical year with state elections and all of these bills up to be passed.
Well, let me answer your first question because that's a real easy answer. Then I'll get to the second part of the question. The answer to the Attorney General issue is with the Moreland Commission. Now, I back up. This Attorney General and this governor don't particularly care for one another. That's number one. But we were encouraged that he actually included the Attorney General in the Moreland Commission. They sat up there together and they said nice things about one another. And all of these people, the 25 DAs and all of the law professors who are attorneys, I was not able to do that, but they all were pronounced by the Attorney General as Assistant Attorneys Generals. So they all had this power now of the Attorney General's office. Currently, as far as the Board of Elections is concerned, well, two things. One, the indictments for these legislators that have gone on actually come out of Preet Bharara, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District. They come out of most of them have come out of his office. He has, of course, the power to federally indict, which is what he's done. The Attorney General, and going back, we were there when Cuomo was the Attorney General, and we wanted joint concurrent jurisdiction between the Attorney General and the State Board of Elections. And Mr. Cuomo's office did not want that at the time he was Attorney General because he was going to run for governor and he wasn't in the business of making enemies. And now this Attorney General has said he would be perfectly happy with joint jurisdiction. It is in what the league would like to propose. I don't believe it's in the governor's proposal.
It isn't. Right now, just to be clear to everyone, the Attorney General has no legal authority to enforce the campaign finance laws in New York. It has to be either the Albany DA or the DA of the district where the legislator comes from.
Which might be down here.
It did 30 or 40 years ago, the Attorney General had jurisdiction and it was taken away. So there is
Under
no
Mr.
jurisdiction.
Javits,
He does obviously have the jurisdiction to enforce some of the other laws.
Like
Not
bribery.
And the New York State bribery laws are fairly weak, which is why Bharara has been using the federal law. So one of the proposals in Cuomo in the budget that Cuomo has is to strengthen the bribery laws as well as do.
It's called the public corruption part of it. The second half of your question is concerning vacancies. The league does have an issue with both of them. As we said, the mere fact that committee chairs of the political parties get to select the people to run for these special elections, number one, which unfortunately we do not have a position on, that particular issue of how they are selected to run in a special election. But yes, I have spoken in our area, we have an assembly member that represents Saratoga Springs, if any of you are familiar with the racetrack up there, and he left to become DA of Washington County, and his seat is vacant. He's a Republican, but right now there is a real big issue up there about casinos in that area. The people don't want it, and they are very upset. So I have been called by upstate reporters who want to know about the vacancies. Do we think having 11 vacancies, possibly 2 more if Smith or Sampson leave because of their ethical lapses? No, we don't think that's a good idea. 1.8 million a million New Yorkers are left without representation through a budget process, which means education funding for many of these areas. But the governor, in his whatever wisdom, has decided that is not to his interest to call a special election.
A couple months, Laura. It couldn't be done.
That's right,
As a
in time for the
practical
budget.
matter, it actually wasn't going to be done in time for the budget anyway.
And he came out the other day with a specific quote about, well, once the budget is done, nothing else happens in Albany anyway, which several people question. But that's where the governor is on this, and the governor is the only person who can call a special election. You're going crazy here.
No, I'm not really. Probably never goes crazy, so he's going to wait a minute.
Okay.
No, we spoke about the Moreland Commission.
Yes.
What do they do these days?
Well, I will tell you what they're doing. They are not defunct in any way, shape, or form. Their policy, the policy phase of it is over. The second phase, which will go on throughout this entire year with a final report in December of 2014, at the end of December of 2014. But right now, the easiest way to explain it to all of us who are non-lawyers is to say the phase they're in right now is kind of akin to a grand jury. It is the investigatory phase. They have put out these subpoenas. They are investigating. They are doing their due diligence that lawyers do. But that's not something that they're going to make public, because you're guilty, you're innocent until, and you don't want to ruin anybody's reputation unless you have the goods enough on them to actually take them to some kind of adjudication and indictment, whatever. So that part of it is not something you're going to see a lot of. You will see probably the court battle over separation of powers that will end up probably toward the beginning of April. That will be public because it's going to happen in a court. But as far as naming names, until they have all the information they need about whomever it is that they are investigating, we, the public, will not know that. Yes, the natives are getting restless, yes. Yes, Robin.
Barbara, I'd like to go back to the role of the governor in this advocacy and try and understand where the role he plays in any successful bill. Certainly, he took up the cause of same-sex marriage and
Entirely different issue. Easy issue compared to this. Easy issue.
Last year, he personally championed the cause of campaign finance reform. We were part of that 1,000-person phone call. Hard to understand why he isn't once again taking the leadership role and how he can be persuaded to do so.
Well, he does. No, he does think budget. To him, that's a huge commitment to put something in the budget. Now, you know, this is an election year. This is a political decision that all these men and women make. And he put it in the budget. He did what we asked. We wanted that added commitment. It was in a state of the state. These are the benchmarks one uses for commitment. Then he put it in the budget. Now he will have to negotiate, which is behind closed doors. He will have to negotiate with the legislature to see what it is they can bargain. What's going to fall off the table? Is it going to be public financing, but he'll get enforcement maybe? Will he maybe get closing of the LLC loopholes, and maybe he won't get anything else? This will not come out, and what it's so important for you, the public, to do is watch for those one-house bills, because then you get an idea of what is going to be traded. What will the legislature want in their one-house bills, and what can the governor sit down at the table, and in the budget negotiation, they're all called tables. He can sit down at the good government table, for lack of a better word, and start to negotiate with the legislature. Will he hold up the budget for campaign finance reform? I would doubt that. Simply because this is an election year and you don't, and the public, unfortunately, the public isn't as committed as those of us in this room generally, or it would have been passed 30 years ago if there was public outcry. Look at, and you people don't deal with mandate relief probably down here much, but there is, property taxes are the biggest issue upstate Albany has, upstate New York has, and people are, and the SAFE Act, anybody, 6,000 people came and ruined all the lawns around the Capitol on the New York SAFE Act, which probably wasn't a big deal down here, but in upstate New York, he dropped 20 points in his approval because of the SAFE Act, which is the Gun Control Act. So if we had 6,000 people that came and marched on the Capitol, that might be a little bit different, but we can't.
What did we get to that rally a couple of years ago?
Oh, probably about 200, 250 people. So you have to play, and the governor, we keep going to the governor's office. I will tell you the reason, as long as nobody's going to tell tales. Any reporters in the room, by the way? For I don't see my Daily News or New York Daily News or the Post in the room. The reason why it's in the budget, my estimation, just my opinion from having been in Albany for 35 years, is the New York leads, those funders, Jonathan Soros et al., all the people on the New York leads who fund his campaigns, they got to him. We did our best. We are part of that, but these are the people with the big money. And they got to him and said, we want this commitment. We want it in the budget. So it got in the budget. She said only one, but...
Mine's in terms of taking what we're hearing here and the energizing, like further energizing the base, right? We're voters, we're concerned citizens.
Right.
This is an issue that matters to us. Because basically, not only, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and reach out to everyone I know who is a New York voter. And I want to educate them really quickly. Like, we have to assume they know nothing about this. Campaign finance, they've heard it before. But, this isn't their thing. And they're not even, they feel, close to God because they show up and vote, right? So, like, I want to turn around to the people I know and tell them, 3 quick sentences, bullet points on
Easy answer.
What's
Easy
going
answer.
on, what's being proposed, what do we want instead, or why do we want it so bad?
Use that, but the answer to how you get to them and how you explain this to them is the first question you say to them is, what do you care about? Do you care about your kids' education? Do you care about your health care? Well, Obamacare took care of a lot of the health care, but what issue is important to you? And then you turn right around to them and say, well, did you know that the special interests in Albany, which is the state government, the special interests in Albany are keeping you from being able to get that whatever it is, and the only way you're ever going to get that, because the only thing you need to tell these people is if an investor or down here, let's take New York City for example, a big LLC, a big developer, why do you suppose they give the Democratic Campaign Committee and the Republican Campaign Committee $5 million, let's just say $5 million in housekeeping? Why do you think they do that? Not out of the goodness of their heart. They are going to get tax credits for it. They're going to get something off of their bottom line. And when they get something off their bottom line, you don't get what you want on whatever it issue because they have so drowned out your voice. So all you have to do for them is connect the dots. Once you see them going like this, oh my God, which is what every DA did when I started to explain things to them at the Moreland Commission. They went, you got to be kidding me, that can't be legal. Well, yes, it's all legal. It's what's called legal bribery. And once you start getting the nodding of yes, then you tell them, okay, this is what you can do about that, and then give them the 3 or 4 things the league wants done.
And then a tactical question.
Okay.
What's most effective in terms of lobbying our state level legislators? Is it, showing up in person if we can, but otherwise, calling is much more effective than like emailing.
Well, there's a lot of controversy, right? You know, to be perfectly blunt with you, and writing a short personal note, because there's a little thing on a computer called the delete button. And often what aides to state legislators will do is they will kind of get a ballpark figure of, okay, we had 100 emails on this. They don't really read them. They just read the subject matter and they start counting them up. A phone call, yes, and if it were a concerted effort and you could jam their phone lines, we sometimes do that, and we get calls from, say we're using the governor's office, we get calls from the governor's office saying, okay, Barbara, we heard you. Or whatever issue it's on. Okay, we get it. Now stop jamming our lines because we have people who want to get work done. You don't want to alienate, we don't care if we alienate the governor's office. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Yes, we do care. Yes, Sal, yes, we do care. We don't set out to alienate anybody. But a local legislator, you really don't want to make your local legislator really angry because his staff can't work. So a little personal note, and I know enough legislative people, aides, that will tell me, my boss says to me, the legislator, their boss, will say to them, you get a personal note, you damn well better answer it.
Better than an email. You know, we have, all of our members are on the email action alert. We ask them to send a form. We can ask them on certain issues to send a form email. But for them to actually get a personally crafted letter from a constituent saying, this is what I want, this is important to me, that's probably, other than a meeting with them, like a league meeting with them, probably the most effective thing is that. So you can ask them, just take these points, write to your particular legislator, and it's very easy to find them.
Yeah.
You know, and just send a letter making these points and saying, this matters to me, it's important to me.
And if anybody is really interested, the State League office, these are great little handy books to have. It's a picture and all the critical information, including their top staff names, are in this little book that we carry around all the time. And, you know, I was continuing to look. Actually, there aren't a lot, I'm looking for Staten Island, but there aren't a lot of Republicans there. However, I would look.
What book is that?
This is our legislative reference guide. It is mass-produced, but we order, I don't know how many, quite a few with our name on it. They do cost, what, $2 or something? Laura will tell you. State office.
Their website.
Don't you have that?
And there are.
Can you give them a letter and
Yes.
at that time? And does
It's
it
always
have
a
to
good
be
idea.
typed? Pardon me?
It's a good idea to leave something with them.
Yeah,
Certainly,
right.
Great
Does
idea.
it have to be typed or can it be handwritten?
It can be handwritten as long as they can read your writing.
Good. And which one is better?
Handwritten.
I think we should thank Barbara. She has been talking for 2 hours.
The City League's Campaign Finance Reform Committee is meeting this month on February 19th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at the City League's office on 43rd Street. So any of you who are feel like you've gotten religion today and you want to be involved, please come to that meeting. And if you will, I'll send you some material if you give me your email address today. Thank you very much.